This NBA season, we were introduced to one of the league's greatest additions of all time, the in-season tournament. Each team got a chance to play in a group phase in order to qualify for the tournament and therefore a shot at the NBA Cup. Meanwhile, it was all built into the regular season schedule. The tournament gave us some of the best moments of the season so far, such as Tyrese Haliburton and the Pacers' dominance, and LeBron James leading the Lakers to the championship at 38 years old and winning tournament MVP. However, it left a lot of people asking the question, what if the in-season tournament existed before this season and we got to see NBA superstars such as Magic Johnson, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, and Michael Jordan dominate in the in-season tournament? Well, a lot of people have their theories.
And you know what he would have done? However many they would have played through his career, if they'd had this year after year, he would have won it every single year. That's just what he did. That's what he was made of.
But I'm going to be telling you what actually would have happened if the NBA's in-season tournament existed before this season using real games that were played throughout NBA history. But before I get started, I just wanted to let you know that this is going to be a 4-part series starting in 1984 and coming all the way back up to current day. I'm going to be releasing one episode per week, so make sure to hit subscribe if you want to see how all your favorite NBA stars have done throughout history. Also, I would really appreciate a like if you enjoy the video. A ton of time went into making this. I had to go back and get all the right scores, the right point differentials, the right home court advantages and stats. So if you enjoy, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. Instead of going right to 1984, we actually need to go to the season prior in 1983 when the Bulls finished second to last in the Eastern Conference, which is important to us for two different reasons.
Now we are ready for the third pick, and the Chicago Bulls, who have been drafting very high down through the years, and they have the third pick today.
The Chicago Bulls pick Michael Jordan of the University of North Carolina.
So obviously being that bad in 1983 gave the Bulls a chance to draft Michael Jordan, but it also placed them in an in-season tournament group for Jordan's rookie season because the groups are based on the previous season standings, as you can see on the screen right now. These standings put rookie Michael Jordan and his Bulls in Group C alongside Sidney Moncrief and the Bucks, World B. Free Cavaliers, and Otis Birdsong and Darryl Dawkins' New Jersey Nets. And with that, in just his second career game, Michael Jordan played his first in-season tournament game against the Milwaukee Bucks, losing 108-106. He put up 21 points, 5 rebounds and assists, along with 2 steals. But, lucky for them, in their next 2 in-season tournament games, they ended up beating both the Nets and the Cavaliers, giving them a 2-1 record through group play. Through group play, Michael Jordan averaged about 29, 5, and 7 with 2 steals, which was good enough for the Bulls to qualify for the in-season tournament his rookie season. Here's how the rest of the league did throughout group play. The best team in each group moves on to the in-season tournament, as well as a wildcard team from any of the 3 groups, with the best record and point differential being the tiebreaker if necessary. In the Eastern Conference, the group winners were Gus Williams' Washington Bullets, Isaiah Thomas's Pistons, and MJ's Bulls, with Sidney Moncrief's Bucks picking up the wildcard spot. In the Western Conference, the qualifiers were Magic's Lakers, Alex English's Nuggets, Darrell Griffith and Adrian Dantley's Utah Jazz, and George Gervin's San Antonio Spurs. That sets up our inaugural in-season tournament bracket, with Michael Jordan and the Bulls heading to Washington to take on the Bullets in the first round. And on January 30th, 1985, Michael Jordan went to Washington and put up 38 points, 8 assists, and 7 rebounds with 4 steals, but it wasn't enough and the Bullets took down the Bulls 106-95 and moved on. The Pistons, Lakers, and Nuggets also moved on to round 2, and since there's no neutral site, the higher seed got home court advantage. But despite this, Alex English and the Nuggets still beat the Lakers and moved on to the finals, and the Washington Bullets upset the Detroit Pistons, meaning that these two teams would take on one another in the first ever in-season tournament finals on January 18th, 1985. And on that day, Alex English and Fat Lever were just too much for the Washington Bullets, barely edging them out 108-106 to win our first ever in-season tournament. Alex English wins in-season tournament MVP, putting up 32 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists on average, including a dominant 44-point performance in round 1. A few other notable players on this team were triple-double machine Fat Lever, NBA All-Star Calvin Nat, and an old Dan Issel. Later this season, we'd see the Denver Nuggets lose 4-1 in the conference finals to the eventual NBA champion Los Angeles Lakers. They won it 4-2 over Boston. We also saw MJ lose 3-1 in the Eastern Conference first round to the Milwaukee Bucks, and this brings us to the end of our 1984-1985 NBA season. The Bulls went 38-44 and were primed to have a great sophomore season for Michael Jordan, but unfortunately, That's not how things went, and he ended up breaking his foot, causing him to miss most of the season as well as the in-season tournament. Mike did get to play one game against the Detroit Pistons, and he had a solid game, and the Bulls actually went 2-1 in this in-season tournament, but the point differential was not enough and they did not qualify for the tournament phase. The teams that qualified were World B. Freeze Cavs, Charles Barkley's 76ers, and a breakout season from Jeff Malone got the Bullets back into the tournament. The Bucks, Lakers, and Nuggets qualified again with similar teams, along with sophomore Hakeem and the Rockets and Mike Mitchell's Spurs. The first round saw a lot of close games, but it was pretty chalked with every higher seed moving on other than the Cavs. The second round was more of the same, with both the Sixers and the Lakers dominating their opponents and moving on to a highly anticipated finals matchup. It was Cheeks, Malone, Barkley, and Irving, even with an old Bob McAdoo for the Sixers, against Magic Johnson, an old Kareem, Kurt Rambis, Michael Cooper, Byron Scott, AC Green, and so on. Unfortunately, listing off the names was the most exciting part about this game because the Lakers stomped the Sixers 134-100 even without Magic Johnson. And even though he didn't play in the finals, Magic Johnson is the tournament MVP, averaging a near triple-double, even though there's a real case for Byron Scott, who put up 24, 29, and 26 throughout the tournament. Add another trophy to the case for the reigning 1985 NBA Finals champions. But their luck would run out later that season when they would lose to the Houston Rockets with Ralph Sampson and Hakeem 4-1 in the Western Conference Finals, giving way to the Celtics to win the championship 4-2. Michael Jordan and the Bulls were swept in the first round by Boston, but MJ put up an astounding 44 points per game. Unfortunately for the Bulls, without MJ the season before, they only went 30-52, placing them in the dreaded 3-team group with the Detroit Pistons and the NBA champion Boston Celtics, where things did not go well for them, despite MJ averaging 40 points a game. Throughout group play, we would see the Milwaukee Bucks and Los Angeles Lakers qualify for an impressive third straight year for both teams. Larry Bird and the Celtics make their first in-season tournament appearance after winning the finals the season before, and the Philadelphia 76ers look to avenge their in-season tournament blowout from the season before. New qualifying teams included Dominique Wilkins' Hawks, Mark Aguirre's Mavericks, a Portland Trailblazers team led by Kiki Vanderway and Clyde the Glide, and a very interesting Warriors team who went 3-0 for the first seed despite being the worst team in the Western Conference the season before. And their luck wouldn't run out yet because they would manage to pull off a second victory against the Lakers this tournament, with Sleepy Floyd putting up 33 and 15 along with 30 from Joe Barry Carroll. The Sixers, Bucks, and Mavericks would also move on with a close game in every matchup. Round 2 would have two great games, with the Sixers barely defeating the Bucks with only 7 players, where everyone scored at least 12 but no one scored more than 18. The Mavericks also took down the Warriors despite another Sleepy Floyd masterclass, putting up 41 and 10 on 17 shots. So the Sixers were back in the in-season tournament finals for the second straight year. Would this finally be their year? Nope. They lost 123-110 to the Mavericks. Mark Aguirre put up 30 and Rolando Blackman put up 29. Some other notable names from this team were Derek Harper and Detlef Schrempf, along with Sam Perkins. Mark Aguirre won in-season tournament MVP, putting up 24, 4, and 4, and then proceeded to lead the Mavericks to their best season in team history at the time, going 55 and 27. Unfortunately, they were upset in the first round by the 7th-seeded Seattle Supersonics 3-1. MJ's Bulls were swept in the first round for the second year straight by Larry Bird and the Celtics, who then went on to lose in the NBA Finals 4-2 to the Lakers. The Lakers also got some revenge on the Warriors for their in-season tournament loss, beating them 4-1 in the second round. When the 87-88 season came around, a lot of people said it could be the Bulls' year. Michael Jordan had averaged 37 points per game the season before, and he was already considered a top 3 player in the NBA, if not the best. Yet, the team had yet to see any success in the playoffs and even the in-season tournament as well. Unfortunately for the Bulls, they found themselves in yet another unfavorable in-season tournament group with the powerhouse Celtics as well as the 76ers. But fortunately, things went their way and the Celtics had a terrible performance, especially against the Sixers, and the Bulls ended up going 2-0 with a differential of 15, qualifying them for the in-season tournament. Michael averaged an impressive 34 points, 8 rebounds, with 5 steals in these games, giving the Bulls the 2 seed in the upcoming tournament. But they would have some stiff competition in the East, as the Atlanta Hawks went 3-0 with a differential of plus 62, led by Dominique and Doc Rivers. The Milwaukee Bucks qualified yet again, being led by Terry Cummings at this point, now that Sidney Moncrief had grown old, and the Pacers, who got the wild card spot, led by Chuck Person with a young Reggie Miller. Still, the Western Conference looked even better than the East, with the 3 previous in-season tournament champions qualifying, as well as the up-and-coming Jazz led by Karl Malone and John Stockton. This first round produced the best games the in-season tournament had seen in its entire history, with every game being decided by 2 or less, other than the Bulls versus the Bucks, in which Michael Jordan took over and the Bulls ended up defeating the Bucks 111-105. He put up 32, 7, and 4 with 3 steals, and Charles Oakley also had a great game for the Bulls with a near triple-double. In round 2, the Bulls would face their toughest test yet, facing off against Dominique Wilkins and the Hawks, and Dominique had a great game putting up 35 points. Luckily for the Bulls, no one gave him any help, and the Bulls defeated them, moving on to the first ever in-season tournament final in their history. They would take on the defending in-season tournament champion Dallas Mavericks, who had just defeated the Denver Nuggets 109-96. It was a great game between these two teams. It came down to the final possession, in which a 1-point victory was secured by the Dallas Mavericks, who went back-to-back. Mark Aguirre was your second straight in-season tournament MVP. Michael had a rough night shooting the ball, only going 8 for 20. He still put up 25 points, but it ended up costing the Bulls the game and their first ever NBA Cup. It all worked out for Michael in the end though, because as we know, he was able to wipe his tears with his first ever Most Valuable Player award this season. In the playoffs, both the Bulls and the Mavericks would lose to the two teams that eventually met in the NBA Finals, the Bulls losing 4-1 to the Pistons in the Eastern Conference semifinals, and the Mavericks losing to the Lakers in Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals. The Lakers would eventually pick up their third title in 4 seasons after beating the Pistons. All things considered, it was a solid season for MJ and the Bulls. He won his first MVP, they made it out of the first round for the first time, and an in-season tournament final can't hurt. Not to mention, it set them up well for the top seed in their group the following season against the Hawks, Bullets, and Nets in the 1988 NBA in-season tournament. Now that Michael was an MVP, there was no messing around, and they made quick work of the group, going 3-0, including a great overtime victory 115-112 against the Hawks. Michael averaged 33, 6, and 6, and was headed to his second straight in-season tournament, but this time as the top seed for the first time ever. The Hawks also qualify for the tournament as the wild card in the East, along with Barkley's Sixers, and of course, death, taxes, the Bucks and the Lakers make it once again. Mark Aguirre and the Mavericks look to three-peat in the tournament, while the Nuggets also qualify again, and the Phoenix Suns are in the tournament as well. It's also nice, if you check out the Eastern Conference, there is no more 3-team group, because this was the year that the Hornets and the Heat joined the NBA. Fun fact, the Heat were apparently in the West their first season, which I did not know. Although the Bulls were the number 1 seed in the tournament, they were off to a pretty rough start this year and were only 10-9 when the Hawks came to town, and eventually their luck caught up with them. They lost 106-88 on another rough shooting night from Michael Jordan. The Hawks would face the Milwaukee Bucks in round 2, meanwhile the Lakers beat the Nuggets, and the Phoenix Suns knocked off the 2-time tournament defending champ Dallas Mavericks behind a 37-point performance by Eddie Johnson off the bench. In the semifinals, ex-MVP Moses Malone had a vintage performance for the Hawks, putting up 25 points and 16 rebounds, and in the West, the Lakers defeated the Suns behind Byron Scott's 27 points. On March 19, 1989, the Hawks went to Inglewood to battle with the Lakers, and it was a great game. Magic Johnson dropped 29 points, and Byron Scott had 21. And on the Hawks side of things, Dominique Wilkins had 33, and there was a legacy performance from Doc Rivers, who had 27 points, and it helped the Hawks to bring it home 113-111 to win the in-season tournament. Dominique Wilkins cemented himself in history, winning the MVP, averaging 28 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists. It's nice for the Hawks that they were able to win the in-season tournament, because that was the extent of their success this season. They got bounced 3-2 in the first round by the Milwaukee Bucks. The Lakers headed all the way back to the finals, where they were actually swept by a stacked Pistons team, including Isaiah Thomas, Adrian Dantley, Joe Dumars, Mark Aguirre, and future teammate of MJ, Dennis Rodman. The Bulls also lost to this team in the conference finals 4-2. This was the end to a rather lackluster season for the Chicago Bulls, who had only 47 wins and had not yet had much tournament or playoff success, especially after being knocked out by a budding rival Detroit Pistons. These 47 wins placed the Bulls in a group with 5 teams for the first time. Alongside them were the Knicks, Bullets, Pacers, and new franchise, the Orlando Magic. The Bulls got off to a rough start, losing to Patrick Ewing and the Knicks by 3 points. They ended up winning against the Bullets, but a loss to the Pacers by 2 sealed their fate. In almost all of my research, I found that you cannot advance to the in-season tournament with a 2-2 record. It is very rare no matter how good your differential is. The Knicks won the group with a 3-1 record despite having a 0-point differential. The defending in-season tournament champion Hawks made it, and the defending champion Pistons, while an aging Celtics core also qualified with the wildcard spot. In the West, the young duo of Stockton and Malone dominated, as well as a rookie David Robinson. The Suns qualified, led by a trio of Tom Chambers, Kevin Johnson, and Jeff Hornacek, and the Nuggets got the wildcard spot, led by an older Alex English and Fat Lever as usual. It's also noteworthy that the Bucks and the Lakers didn't qualify for the first time in tournament history. The first round was dominated by the young big men. Patrick Ewing and Karl Malone both dropped 30 points, and David Robinson had a good game as well. All three of them led their teams to wins. Meanwhile, the defending champion Hawks also advanced to round 2. The second round had two great games. First off, the Spurs headed to Utah to take on the Jazz, who were undefeated at this point, and it wasn't Karl Malone who had a great game, but John Stockton, who put up 31 points, 16 assists, and 5 steals. He also made the only three-pointer in this game. He was 1 for 1, and there were only 3 total attempts, and that's what basketball was like in the 90s. The Knicks also had a great game, barely beating the Hawks. Shout out to Mark Jackson, who outdueled Doc Rivers, and 4 of the 5 starters for the Knicks had double-doubles. Shout out to Charles Oakley and Gerald Wilkins as well. The championship was played in Utah on January 25th, 1990, and the game was not even close. The Jazz destroyed the Knicks behind a 26-point performance from Karl Malone, and they also had some great performances off the bench from Thurl Bailey and Darrell Griffith. And just like that, Karl Malone and the Jazz did something they were never able to do in the regular season and won the championship. Well, the regular season championship. Karl Malone put up 26, 8, and 3 per game. Unfortunately for the Jazz, later that season, their playoff run was cut short as they lost to Phoenix 3-2 in the first round. They were a good opponent to lose to because the Suns went all the way to the conference finals, where they then lost to the Blazers, who lost to the defending NBA champion Pistons in the NBA Finals. The Pistons also defeated the Bulls in a Game 7, which was MJ's furthest run to date. The Bulls had another solid season record-wise, and they ended with 55 wins, which of course was good enough for the top seed in their group among the Celtics, Cavs, and Heat. On November 6th, 1990, the Bulls played their first in-season tournament game of the Boston Celtics. They were also looking for their first win of the season in 3 games, but unfortunately, they would not get it, and they lost this game by 2 points to a very old Celtics core, including Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish. That would mean that they would have to be perfect from here on out to qualify for the tournament, and lucky for them, they had a guy named Michael Jordan on their team who helped them do it. They ended up qualifying as the wild card spot with a differential of plus 42. They would play the same Celtics team that just beat them in the first round. The Bucks are back in the tournament, led by a team that actually wasn't very good with Ricky Pierce, and the stacked Detroit Pistons team led by Joe Dumars and Isaiah Thomas. Magic's Lakers were back in the tournament alongside Hakeem and the Rockets, both from Group A. A 3-0 Blazers team who had just made the finals before qualified behind Clyde the Glide, and a very fun Warriors team with Chris Mullin, Mitch Richmond, and Tim Hardaway qualified as well. And on November 9th, 1990, the Bulls headed to Boston for their rematch, where they would play the Celtics for the second time in 3 days. Michael Jordan had a masterclass, putting up 41 points, 6 assists, and 5 rebounds, as the Bulls beat the Celtics 120-110, and they were headed back to the second round of the tournament. The second round of the tournament was already looking stacked, with Clyde's Blazers and Magic the Lakers moving on in the West. Meanwhile, the Bulls would take on their rival Detroit Pistons and Isaiah Thomas in the East. But once again, Michael Jordan got off to a great start, and he put up 33 points, 6 assists, and 5 rebounds. Unfortunately for him, he did not get a whole lot of help, and the Bulls were bounced in the second round of the tournament, meaning they would still be looking for the elusive in-season tournament cup. A 30-point performance from James Worthy propelled the Lakers over the Blazers in the Western Conference, setting up a 1989 NBA Finals rematch in the in-season tournament finals. On February 24th, 1991, the Lakers headed to Detroit to play in the in-season tournament finals, and Magic Johnson put on a show, having nearly a 31-point triple-double, giving the Lakers their second ever in-season tournament victory. Magic Johnson had another excellent in-season tournament, averaging 20, 13, and 6, and was actually able to lead the Lakers all the way back to the finals this season in the playoffs, where they met Michael Jordan and the Bulls, who were looking for their first ever NBA championship. They had only lost 1 game so far in the playoffs and had just swept the Pistons in the conference finals. Michael Jordan could not be stopped and averaged 31 points, 11 assists, 7 rebounds, and 3 steals against the Lakers as the Bulls took them down 4-1, winning their first ever NBA championship. So finally, Michael Jordan and the Bulls were at the top of the NBA world, but there was one little thing nagging them, and that was the fact that they were never able to win an in-season tournament. So naturally, when the next season came around in 1991, there was no messing around, especially when it came to group play. They dominated the group stage, going undefeated, defeating stars like Charles Barkley, Patrick Ewing, Drazen Petrovic, and Glenn Rice, whose Heat gave the Bulls the most difficulty of all. Jordan averaged a casual 29 points, 6 rebounds, 5.5 assists, and 2 steals, and that was enough to get the Bulls a differential of plus 49, which gave them the second seed in the upcoming tournament. Shockingly, the Milwaukee Bucks, who finished this season with only 31 wins, went undefeated and earned the first seed, led by Dale Ellis and Moses Malone, neither of which even reached 16 points per game. The Hornets qualified for the tournament for the first time in franchise history as the wild card behind Larry Johnson and Del Curry, and the Cavs qualified once again behind Mark Price, Brad Daugherty, and Larry Nance. The West also had 2 great matchups, including David Robinson and the Spurs against Clyde's Blazers, and the Warriors' Big Three against Karl Malone and John Stockton. In round 1, the Bulls hosted the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they were lucky to have home court advantage because Michael Jordan had the worst scoring game of his in-season tournament history, putting up only 16 points. The Bulls did take them down, however, 108-102. That would set the Bulls up to play a very underwhelming Milwaukee Bucks team in round 2. Meanwhile, in the West, there was a great big man matchup between David Robinson and Karl Malone that came down to the wire in a game that they both put up 30-point double-doubles. Eventually, the Jazz did edge them out 93-92 and move on to the in-season tournament finals. Now, maybe the Bulls were looking forward to this matchup against the Jazz, but a 46-point performance from Michael Jordan couldn't even secure them the dub against the Milwaukee Bucks, as the bench could only score 9 points all night. That meant that this veteran Bucks squad would head to the in-season tournament finals for the first time in team history, despite qualifying for 7 out of the 8 possible tournaments since its inception. On January 8th, 1992, the Milwaukee Bucks headed to Utah, and it was a battle of old versus young, and eventually, Moses Malone and the Bucks came out on top, winning their first in-season tournament title in team history. Although a 35-year-old Moses Malone would win the tournament MVP, it was a team effort with several players on the Bucks scoring double digits, including Alvin Robertson, Jay Humphries, Frank Bukowski, and Dale Ellis. The Bucks were extremely lucky the way things lined up, because after the in-season tournament finals, they would finish out the season 14-37 and miss the playoffs entirely with only 31 wins. Meanwhile, down in Chicago, Michael Jordan and the Bulls were much more focused on the NBA playoffs rather than the in-season tournament. They swept the Heat in the first round, and then had a tough second-round opponent in the New York Knicks that took them to 7 games. After that, they defeated the Cavs 4-2 in the conference finals, and were back in their second straight NBA finals to face Clyde Drexler and Cliff Robinson along with their Portland Trailblazers. Eventually, they won 4-2, and were back-to-back NBA champions. This was by far the Bulls' best season to date, as they had won 67 games, back-to-back NBA championships, and Michael Jordan won his 3rd MVP award. They went into the following season hungry to three-peat and dominate anything in their path. And that is exactly what they did in the upcoming in-season tournament. They won 4 straight games just like the season before, defeating the Pistons, Heat, Hornets, and Magic with a differential of plus 37. For his standards, Michael Jordan didn't even have a great group play, only averaging 26, 7, and 4, but it still clinched the Bulls the top seed in the East, alongside Mark Price's Cavs, the same Ewing Knicks team, and Drazen Petrovic and Derek Coleman's New Jersey Nets. Even though Magic Johnson was no longer in the NBA due to HIV at this point, the Lakers were led by Sedale Threat to the number 1 seed in the in-season tournament. It's also worth mentioning that Charles Barkley was on the Phoenix Suns at this point after leaving the 76ers. They got a qualification, along with Karl Malone's Jazz and Shawn Kemp's Seattle Sonics. Round 1 was an Eastern Conference semifinals rematch of a series that went to 7 games the season before, but Michael Jordan's 42 points elevated the Bulls over the New York Knicks. The Nets also picked up a win over the Cavs behind Derek Coleman's 30-point game. Charles Barkley and Shawn Kemp were both able to pick up W's for their teams in the Western Conference and moved on to round 2 as well. When the Nets came to town, Michael Jordan and the Bulls were on a tear and nothing was stopping that. Michael dropped 38 points and led the Bulls to a victory, sending them back to the in-season tournament finals once again. But when the finals came around, Michael Jordan and the Bulls would not even have been favorites in their own city. They were facing off against the 53-15 Phoenix Suns, who were led by Charles Barkley in his first season with the team. They also had Kevin Johnson and Mark West, along with Danny Ainge coming off the bench. It was a super close game that came down to the wire, and behind Michael Jordan's 44 points, the Chicago Bulls could not get it done and lost to the Phoenix Suns 113-109. This would mean that they would come up short of the in-season tournament cup yet again. Charles Barkley was the tournament MVP that season, putting up 26 points and 11 rebounds, but folks, that would not be the end of this story. Charles Barkley led the Suns to the #1 seed that season, and it would earn him the MVP of the league. They would eventually go all the way to the finals, where they would be met with an invigorated Chicago Bulls team led by Michael Jeffrey Jordan. There's no doubt that Michael would have remembered the in-season tournament finals loss, and he played like it, averaging 41 points, 9 rebounds, and 6 assists in that finals, defeating the Suns and getting revenge 4-2, thus completing his first three-peat. Michael Jordan was at the peak of his prime, now a 3-time champion and a 3-time MVP, which made it even more surprising when he had this announcement to make following their 3rd championship.
I'm very solid with my decision of not to play the game of basketball in the NBA. Reasoning being, I've heard a lot of different speculations about my reasons for not playing, but I've always stressed to people that have known me and the media that has followed me that when I lose the sense of motivation and the sense of to prove something as a basketball player, it's time for me to move away from the game of basketball.
So for now, Michael Jordan was off to play baseball, and he would have to settle as a 3-time MVP and 3-time NBA champion because he had not yet won the NBA Cup. In his first 9 seasons in the league, he qualified for the in-season tournament 5 times and made the finals twice, losing both. So there you have it for part 1. Michael Jordan has retired without winning an in-season tournament. Make sure you tune in next week where I highlight the rest of Michael Jordan's career, as well as featuring some new young superstars such as Kobe Bryant and Tim Duncan. Once again, this took me a ton of time, a lot of work, so I would really appreciate it if you would like and subscribe, and make sure to tune back in for the next video. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks.